Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the International Museum of Muslim Culture's Islamic Heritage Month Earth Day event. I am Lina Ali, Deputy Executive Director and Chief Curator at the IMMC. My guest today is Lana Mustafa, an environmentalist, public farm director, and New Jersey homesteader. Lana is a second-generation Palestinian American who grew up gardening and appreciating the gifts of nature. Join me as we get to know this wonderfully talented woman as part of our Islamic Heritage Month virtual series at the International Museum of Muslim Cultures. Lana, welcome to the program.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Some might ask, what does Earth Day or environmental awareness have to do with Islamic heritage or our Museum of Muslim Cultures? Well, our faith teaches us that the earth is an amana, or a gift that we as humans must protect and preserve. We're taught to tend to the fields of tini wa zaytun, or figs and olives, as mentioned in the Quran, and we're encouraged to care for the creatures that are also sharing this earth with us. Lana, please tell us about yourself and how you became interested in what you do today.
So I am currently an urban farmer here in Clifton, New Jersey. I'm also the farm director at Montclair Community Farm. It's another local nonprofit organization. And what I've been doing pretty much most of my life is gardening, whether it's like just exploring my backyard as a kid or tending to fruit trees in Palestine, living with my grandparents, all sorts of things. I've always been like very drawn and very curious about nature and this planet and just like very connected. I laugh and I kind of tell my friends that like I don't remember the color of their like curtains at home, but I remember who had like the apple tree or who had the pear tree or who had this rose bush or that rose bush growing. So it's always been very dear and near to my heart. Growing up, like I said, my grandfather was an avid gardener in Palestine, and I was living there for a really long time. So he would go back and forth and he would kind of like leave me in charge of the land. So I would have to be responsible for making something called jorat, which is like these kind of like mounds around the trees where you would have to then pour water and then allow the tree to soak it up. So it's always been something that I've been like really curious about. Fast forward, I got married, I had children, and suddenly I was back in the yard again. You know, we talk about kids and the importance of like sensory learning, and wow, what better place than the backyard, right? So I had 3 children under the age of 5, and they weren't all in school. So I was like giving them all these cool learning experiences. We started gardening together more often in the backyard. I was maintaining a small garden, but once I realized how engaged and curious they were, it kind of inspired and fueled me. And it also brought me like so much joy, and like so many memories came up for me from my childhood with this beautiful wind. I'm gonna blow my computer off. Oh, my post-it notes. So I was basically urban farming in my backyard. Started with one really small garden bed, a 4x4 bed. And then I noticed that my kids were really curious. Suddenly, like my 2-year-old was picking a tomato right off of the vine and like biting right into it. My kids were more interested in eating things from the garden and sampling them rather than what I was buying from the grocery store. So that really fueled me. You know what I mean? It brought me closer. I started researching what things I can grow with children, what had the quickest turnover so that they, maintain that attention span really. And then in 2015, I, on a whim, kind of became a chicken mama. So I brought home some baby chicks for my kids to continue learning and experimenting. And we fell in love with the chickens. Of course, we became very attached. And but yeah, so we had these baby chicks and my kids and I were very attached. And I started researching. I was on like backyard chicken keeping forums. And I understood after like learning a little bit about the care and what was required from me. I was like, okay, some people are out there doing this in 2015. It's not like a thing from the past, or it's not something that only happens in Palestine. Like there are people here in the modern world, the United States of America, chicken keeping. So it kind of encouraged me. And this is like very pre like social media. I was like just like momming at that age. Stage in my life, I should say. And we went out on Craigslist, got some refurbished materials, and we created our very own chicken coop. And a few months later, we got our first egg. And my kids were very engaged. They kind of understood all about the process. It also gave me an opportunity to assign more responsibility to them as they were growing. So like you get bored of chores, but then suddenly you have like this life that kind of needs you, so that sense of responsibility and compassion was like very embedded within my children. And by then, I would say two years later, my garden expanded, my knowledge, my curiosity. I went back to college to study biology and realized that this was like really, really my thing. In 2016, I learned about something called colony collapse disorder, and which is a disease that's affecting honeybees all around the world and pretty much killing them.
Yeah.
And I decided to become a beekeeper. So here I am, a couple years down the line, chicken keeper, kid keeper, beekeeper, urban gardener. Here, I don't know whether or not everybody can see, but we're at Montclair Community Farm, one of the urban properties that I manage, and it's about 6,000 square feet, and we are producing almost 1,500 pounds of produce over the course of a summer, basically. So we're providing our community with local organic produce at a fraction of the price.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing that. And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
you're basically an urban homesteader. And just to clarify the term, homesteading, to those who might be unfamiliar, it's basically a lifestyle of self-sufficiency, basically where you produce and preserve your own food on your own land, among other things, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you're gardening and that has a very short season. So one of the ways to kind of become more self-sufficient is to learn how to preserve your own food. So over the last 2 years, I would say I got into canning, and I'm actually now a master canner. So whenever I have an abundance of a crop at home or on the farm, I'm at home cooking it up and then preserving it. So I have a pantry, and there's like canned string beans, tomato sauce, canned peppers,
Wow.
preserved. I, cut and dry my herbs, freeze things. So alhamdulillah, it's one way that I'm able to kind of do something that I love, but also save in the process.
That is wonderful. MashaAllah. MashaAllah.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. And you mentioned herbs, and that goes into my next question. So
Yeah.
the Prophet Muhammad used herbs and medicinal plants for a variety of treatments. In fact, prophetic medicine is an actual thing that's practiced by people. I remember growing up on our family bookshelves, my mom had plenty of Tubb al-Nabawi and Tubb al-Ashab books. So yeah, and we know that the Prophet loved henna, for example, or hilba, fenugreek, honey, nigella, sativa, or the black seed. So can you share why herbalism is important to you, and what herbs and plants do you grow? What do you do with them?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So absolutely. Plants actually do have a lot of potency and a lot of medicinal benefits to us. This goes to say way before we became, I would say before the agricultural revolution.
Hunter-gatherers?
Yeah, we were hunter-gatherers. I was going to say stagnant. I'm like, that's not the word. But once upon a time, we were hunter-gatherers, and people were traveling far distance to really sustain themselves, And one thing that people were using for medicine were plants. So we have a direct kind of relationship with plants, and plants through scientific discovery have also evolved to kind of call our attention. There's a reason why flowers look and are shaped the way they're shaped.
And yeah, you mentioned lavender good for sleep. I wonder if you've ever dabbled in or thought about doing oils, so extracting oils from these plants.
So I thought you were going to go with infusions. I've never really extracted oils because it's such a labor-intensive process.
Yeah.
And to get the essential oils, you need like a massive amount of plant to produce a really small amount. Sure. But what I do is called an herbal infusion. So basically you soak the plant that you want to pull the medicinal qualities from in either oil or a hot liquid like water. So if you're drinking it like a tea, you would let it steep for a couple of days, maybe 9 to 10 hours or overnight, and then drink it for like real concentrated medicine. Or if you were looking to kind of pull the medicinal qualities of a plant to use topically, like a skin salve, you can infuse that plant in some olive oil, any kind of carrier oil, castor oil, almond oil. And what I like to do, one of my favorite herbs is called calendula, and she's actually like a flower, and she's really great for the skin. And now I'm paying attention to, products, and I'm noticing that they're now adding with calendula. But an easy way to do it is grow this beautiful flower that you can pot, and then harvest the petals, put them in oil, let them soak for 4 to 6 weeks, and then just apply directly right onto your skin. So there's tons of different ways to kind of incorporate them into your life.
Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Okay, let's kind of go on to a different topic here. So the past year has proven very difficult for everyone with the unforgiving pandemic. We've seen the effects of systemic racism and the presence of food insecurity in many communities, even mental health issues such as depression from being locked in and perhaps separated from loved ones. And this was especially amplified for those that perhaps don't have a garden or plot of land to get out and enjoy a fresh breath of air, exercise of the mind and body, I say.
Yeah.
How important is nature for our well-being?
So as you mentioned, definitely COVID has hit people really hard, especially in communities that are already vulnerable and exposed, right? So we know that there's a direct correlation between your diet and your health. And then if your health is declining, your mental health is also declining. So it's kind of like this loop that feeds itself. And, part of our mission here in Montclair is to, of course, increase food access to people in need. So yes, we've seen a lot of need for people to start up gardens, to work in community gardens, get outside, not only to, of course, support their communities with produce, but also to help them regain their mental health. And yes, there's a very, very important thing to mention here. We are not separate from nature, right? We've actually come from nature. We need nature to survive. Everything else is just man-made, right? Structures, clothing, styles, computer technology. We've created these concepts. We've created them with mind, but we come from nature, right? So when you are in the forest and you're not looking at your gadgets and you're not reminded of this world that's outside, you finally feel connected at home and at home. And there have been studies to prove that by putting your hand in soil for a few minutes a day helps decrease your cortisol levels. Like you actually decompress, you de-stress just by touching the land. Same thing with like grounding. People are promoting a lot of grounding, like when you're having a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration, just a lot of tension, take off your shoes and just walk on a lawn for a few minutes and see how you feel after that. And to talk about my kids, yeah, absolutely. My children love hiking. So do I. So when I'm super stressed and I need to get away from them, I kind of sneak out and go hiking. And there's always a scene whenever they find out I went hiking. So every year we have our nice little hike spot that we really like unplug, leave all of our gadgets at home and do the trail. We end up swimming in the pond. And for me, it's one way to help my kids connect with one another. They're constantly exploring, helping each other climb up things, turning over rocks, and just engaging in that curiosity. You know what I mean? And that's what being a kid is kind of all about, right? Just maintaining that curiosity, that self-exploration, and finding that compassion. And in nature, subhanAllah, I really feel like if you're paying attention, you see how everything works in a cycle and benefits each other. It's not just a one-way street where it's take. It's actually giving. Like the trees take from the land and give to the atmosphere. And there's just like this beautiful cycle that repeats itself. And the more you expose kids to that, the more they realize the understanding, that understanding that we are from nature, So I think, yeah, definitely outside time is mandatory. Get off your iPads, especially when the weather's beautiful. Any opportunity you can get to really explore, take an environmental class, workshop with your kids. There's a lot of things going on that are kind of promoting that environmental awareness and connection.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for people that perhaps are not the type that will take their kids out on a hike or on a fishing trip or camping or something? How do people get started? What would you suggest is the easiest way to just go out and experience nature today?
Well, if you're not a nature loving person and you are not a fan of getting your hands dirty, but you're still curious about exposing these topics to your kids, I recommend finding a local organization that's doing environmental education. Maybe sign up your child to be around kids that are also curious about the same thing, where there's structured play and they have a theme and a lesson, and it's an opportunity for a parent to catch a break, but also channel that knowledge that they're not able to give and explore with their child to someone else or some other organization who can. We do a lot of that here at Montclair Community Farms. We run a ton of environmental programs, and I teach K-2. And every single moment in this garden, I don't even need a lesson plan. There's a learning moment. Like they see a funny insect that they've never seen before, and then we can go into why pest management is important on a farm, or they see, a robin or a cardinal, and it's like, why are birds important to the ecosystem? You dig in the soil, you see a worm, and it's like, why are worms important to soil? And there's always something to learn. So if you're not into it, there's going to be an organization or a place that can help support your child in their learning.
Exactly. I always encourage people to look at the NPS, the National Park Service. There are wonderful state parks and national parks really in our backyards. You just have to search what's closest to you. I know that the National Park Service has a program for fourth graders where you get a free access pass to these parks. And these are national treasures that our presidents have passed laws to protect, because they offer something really interesting. And even if you're nowhere near one of the larger national parks, there's definitely a state park near you that is as simple as going and taking a walk, really getting that fresh air in and recharging. And today's a great day to do that. I think I'm going to go for a walk later on. I've been postponing since all winter, but it's time to get out and get moving.
Expected to be like a high of like 73.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
If you can make it outside, it's worth it.
Absolutely. You mentioned pest control, which is quite interesting, and that just brought up a question. So last year we started gardening. We have a nice piece of land to work with, but to be honest, we weren't very successful. We had a lot of competition from the squirrels and the rabbits.
Yeah, that happens.
It really became food for them, and that's okay. But I'm just wondering, like from a professional perspective, what can we do?
So is your garden fenced at all? That's my number one question. So if you live in an area where there's a lot of deer or squirrel or raccoons, you may want to consider kind of fencing off your garden, especially if you're fighting deer. Like if that's your problem, you want to fence it off at least 6 to 10 feet high. Wow. And then it depends on your pets, right? So if you're worried about groundhogs, you have to kind of go deep a little and fence off within the soil. For squirrels, unfortunately, they're the biggest culprit here. I don't have enough space to grow 100 tomato plants and support the whole squirrel population. So here at the farm, we barely got any tomatoes because of the squirrels, and they're a challenge. But my advice is also if you can put down some black pepper. They don't like the smell of like pepper. That kind of deters them.
And I can imagine that in different areas, it might be a different culprit. So my parents are in Florida, and they have a gorgeous mango tree, and they have a raccoon that is visiting and getting basically rid of all of the baby mangoes before they even become a mango. And the only thing to cover that is cayenne pepper around the tree and on the bark and twigs. So no, it's okay to share. And inshallah, there's an abundance of crop, but it's good to know, what
it's a big challenge depending on where you live. I think here in a more like urban setting, we don't have as many predators or, animals to worry about. It's mainly, squirrel, some groundhogs, maybe a deer or two, but nothing too major. But we do have the fence, so that keeps them out. But depending on your area, there's usually traps, like have a heart. You can always like trap the animal, kind of relocate him. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us about your bees and your beekeeping a little bit? How does one get into that?
Yeah,
I
sure.
would think that some might be afraid
Mm-hmm.
to get stung. You probably need some equipment, some contraptions. I love the idea of beekeeping, especially for those that have space and can kind of keep it away from the house and the kids. It'd be wonderful to help bring back these bees that we're losing, unfortunately. So besides planting plants that bees like, tell us more about your whole experience with beekeeping.
Yeah, so I got involved in beekeeping when I learned about colony collapse disorder. By then, I was like very deep into my passion and exploration of environmental topics. So I was looking for other areas that I can kind of work towards supporting. And one of the things that I read online was like, if you want to support the bees, plant for pollinators. If you want to support the bees, support a beekeeper, like purchase honey from a beekeeper or become a beekeeper. So of course I was already very curious, and actually one of the first times that I was in direct contact with honeybees was when I was living in Palestine. We found a ginormous swarm of bees just dangling from one of my grandpa's fruit trees. And I remember being like very captivated and very like enthralled. I was just shocked. So when I started researching and learning, that joy kind of really just reignited. And I started learning, really educating myself, making budgets, looking for mentors, reading on my own, watching a lot of documentaries. So if you are considering beekeeping, it's a beautiful hobby to have, but it's very, very challenging. And there's also a lot to learn and understand before committing. So for me, I wanted to get a really thorough understanding of what I was about to commit to. I did get a mentor, so I also recommend getting a mentor, somebody that's very experienced, so that as you're learning and applying what you're learning, you have somebody that you can reference to and ask and just plain old bug for questions and materials. So I had originally gotten started in 2016. I started with one hive. I was very experimental. I was very nervous. I had to buy like the whole suit. So I'm also very allergic to bees, not like deadly allergic, but I get very serious reactions. So of course I went out and bought like the whole astronaut suit. So I was like covered from like head to toe. And I have them at my house in Clifton. And in terms of space, yes, you want to be careful where you place your hive, but bees are very, very docile when they're not being attacked or bothered. So if you have a place for bees, I would say 10 to 15 feet away from any direct line of contact where you don't have to pass right in front of them. That would be a great spot. They like partial sunshade, so maybe a spot that's not too sunny, not too shady. You want to invest in some basics. So you want to make sure you have, first of all, you have to purchase bees. And if you find a mentor, they will connect you with the how-tos on buying bees. Yes, you can have them mailed to your house, live bees. And then of course you need some bee equipment, like a smoker, a hive tool, a bee suit. You need frames, a bee box, all these different things. And then you basically get your bees in the spring, install them as a package. You do have to feed them and support them initially. But once they're strong enough and you have a successful queen that's laying eggs and the population is going, they kind of do their own thing and just fly up and out and come back when they want to. It's a pretty intense hobby. Like I said, it's beautiful, and I'm always mesmerized and captured by, the whole honeybee democracy, because really that's what it is. There is just a beautiful system that the bees have going, and they support each other, and everybody knows their place and, supports the queen. Honey is also a plus, right? So
Absolutely.
honey's great medicine. I actually harvested for the first time last year because I really wanted to make sure I knew what I was doing before kind of exploiting or taking anything from them. So I did harvest about 100 pounds of honey last year for the first time, which was fun. but also labor intensive in and of itself. And
How
yeah,
long does that take? Like starting the process in the springtime, for example, when can you harvest something? How
harvest
many
honey.
months? Yeah.
So it depends on your colony. If you're starting from a package so if you're a first year beekeeper and you have a package, you're basically shipped a box of bees, about 3 pounds of bees and 1 queen. And they're starting from scratch. So they have to rebuild everything. So my advice to anybody that's starting is to not harvest in their first year of beekeeping, because a lot of the bees' energy goes into creating comb, storing enough honey for next year. And then the goal is for them to survive the winter on what they've collected. If you harvest from that, they don't have enough to sustain through winter and they end up dying and you have to start from scratch. So my advice is, if you're going to be a first year beekeeper, beekeep, learn the process, wait till your bees make it through the winter, check stores then. If you have excess and you know that the season is already among us, you're good, you can take that. But if they are on E and you're feeding, then you need to leave them alone, allow them to gather and make sure that they are okay before harvesting. That's if you're, interested in beekeeping 101. If your bees overwintered and they did so successfully, you would have one harvest in about July, which is right after the first spring flow. So I did 2 harvests last year. I did one in July and then I did another in October. So in October, you can kind of go and do an inspection, make sure the queen is healthy, make sure everything looks right. And if they have enough for winter, which is about 2 bee boxes, 80 pounds usually, then you can go ahead and take some more frames. But if they're light and they don't have enough, and you know that as a beekeeper, then you do not harvest except for the one time. Mm-hmm. So a lot of thinking to do and deciding.
And are you prepared to be a mentor for those that might be interested?
So this year, yes, I'm always open to answering any questions that people have. Of course, I always tell them to do the legwork first. If they're interested, I always refer them to start looking at forums and kind of really understanding the gravity of what it means to commit to chicken keeping, to commit to beekeeping. So yes, I'll answer any questions gladly. But I do want to make some recommendations. There's a book called The Honeybee Democracy. That's a really great one. There's also another documentary called More Than Honey, which is amazing documentary about the life of bees and how humans have kind of exploited them to a point of weakness and vulnerability. Those are top of the line. I think once you understand that, you kind of won't go into this naively because you realize the gravity of the work you're about to commit to.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Is there anything else that you wanted to add to this conversation?
I guess maybe just I want to continue to encourage people to connect to nature and take back power into their own hands by learning how to grow their own food. I think we have a food system that's not the greatest, and you can grow a lot of food at home. You can grow a lot of food in other communities that are already gardening. And, it's just one way to support your community and your ecosystem. Maybe not, Lena, with this wind.
Yeah, that's great that you brought that up, that our unfortunately, our food system is a bit tainted. And if people are wanting to get into organic foods, it's more expensive. And so when you're growing your own food, you have to perhaps fertilize and protect from pests. What do you do to keep your ground organic?
So yes, we are an organic farm. I don't use any type of synthetic fertilizer, and basically because of those reasons. I want to grow an organic vegetable garden that I know is good for me. One way to fertilize organically is to start your own composting system. So it's basically saving scraps from your kitchen and adding them to a bin and adding some dry matter like cardboard, wood chips, maybe some dried leaves, and working that pile every so often. That eventually breaks down into beautiful black gold compost where you can add directly to your garden. If you're worried about other pests, there's something called integrated pest management where you kind of learn some tips and tricks on how to keep out specific pests like
Fruit
invasive
flies for me.
insects, fruit flies. There's also all sorts of things like the squash bug. There's the potato beetle. There's the cucumber beetle. So you kind of learn different techniques that are organic and not harmful to your environment. You can do a lot of crop companion planting, where you're planting things that are beneficial for, in terms of like repelling one thing or another, or just supporting something for flavor, or, delivering nitrogen to the roots. There's all these different ways that you can support your soil and the plants.
Yeah. That's amazing. SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Lana, thank you so much for your time today. I certainly enjoyed speaking to you, and I'm sure our audience enjoyed hearing from you as well. We wish you the best with your work, and we hope more people follow in your footsteps of caring for our earth and making the best out of the abundance it has to offer. So shukran. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Nina. It was a pleasure. And I do want to encourage people to get outside today. It's very beautiful.
Yes. Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye. Take care, Nina.
Bye-bye.